Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jimmy Rex Show. And today on the podcast, I have Benton Crane. And this dude has done a little bit of everything. He is one of the co-founders of Angel Studios and also the ex-CEO at Harmon Brothers, marketing agency. You guys will hear a little bit about that in the podcast, but they are some of the most brilliant marketers on the planet. He's also the founder and now executive producer of a company called 10 Ton, where he's been the producer of the movie Homestead, if you've seen that, and an exciting one that he is going to talk about on this podcast coming out next year, but got a lot of projects in the works. So super excited to sit down and talk with Benton today, and this is a podcast you're going to want to listen to. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Also, today's podcast is brought to you by Bucked Up Protein. I drink at least one of these a day, sometimes twice. They are 25 grams of protein, 100 calories, and you can pick them up at your local Harmon's or anywhere that Bucked Up products are sold. This one is rainbow candy flavored, and I don't know how they came up with that, but it seems perfect. When you taste it, you know exactly what they are talking about. So these are amazing. Give them a try. You will be addicted. And with that, let's get to the show. Ben, good to have you on, man.
Hey, my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, when I was in college, 15 years ago, this was before Netflix really kicked off or anything. I had probably 600 DVDs. And so everybody would come check out their DVDs from me. And I had one of the Clear Plays, which was kind of the original thing before VidAngel and everything else kicked off. But so I was one of the first customers of what has kind of become Angel Studios. So it's kind of fun to have you on.
Yeah. I also was a customer of ClearPlay. I had the DVD player. I didn't have a collection quite like yours, but that was a service that I loved. It kind of gave me access to content that I otherwise wouldn't have watched, just because, sometimes I'm not comfortable with the, heavy profanity and, nudity, violence, whatever.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, from the longest period of time, Hollywood has really kind of led people down the direction that it wants to with a lot of different things. I was watching a TikTok recently. It talked about how many of these child actors like the Britney Spears or the Mickey Mouse Club, Christina Aguilera. There's a couple recent ones that are, and then, people kind of fall in love with them when they're children, and then they kind of start putting them into roles where they lead people into a different form of morality that is kind of a dangerous road. And girls are already super attached and love them because they grew up with them. And so they kind of follow them through. And you see how Hollywood really does have their hand in everything, almost like a puppet master. And they can, change the entire society based on the morality that they start injecting into movies, entertainment, and music and all those things. So it's very needed what you guys have decided to provide.
Yeah, so, Jeff Harmon, he's one of my co-founders at Angel Studios. He always says that, the key innovation over at Angel Studios is the gatekeeper model. And what he means by that is in Hollywood, you have this very small group of gatekeepers who they control what gets made, what doesn't get made, what gets the green light, what hits the trash can. And Angel has come along and said, well, what would happen if we put that power in the hands of the viewers? And we just ask the viewer, what do you want to see? What do you want to get made? And it totally changes that dynamic. And it's been interesting because oftentimes, I kind of talked about Hollywood as this big amorphous blob of it's just kind of this cesspool where nothing good comes out of there. But I've since realized that that's not the case. There are amazing people, incredibly talented storytellers who are just working in this environment where they're all kind of beholden to these gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are the ones who get to say, yeah, make this or don't make that. And when you actually provide all these creators with an alternative where the viewers get to choose, then all of a sudden these creators get freed up to make just the most beautiful pieces of art and tell the greatest stories you can imagine. And so, gosh, I'm so grateful to, Neil and Jeff and Jordan and the guys over at that whole team over at Angel Studios who has broken through on that innovation of just put the power in the hands of the viewers. It's groundbreaking. Yeah,
it really is. And I, watching you guys kind of make these different pivots and you really decided we're going to take on this giant task and kind of see how it goes. But then now you look at it, it's only been a couple of years, and already it goes, oh, that makes so much sense. And there's so much money being willing to be a part of this and be thrown into it, because people want entertainment, but they want to be able to watch it with families. They want to be able to tell the real stories of history and of America, and, you know, some of the stories about the Bible and, you know, King of Kings that you guys are a part of. I mean, just an incredible story, right? The Chosen series, these different things you're doing now. These are the stories that people want to watch. These are the stories that help you build those memories with your family, where you watch movies together. I remember when I was a kid and we used to always watch movies together. I remember one year, my brother, I don't even remember, it was some Steven Seagal movie. He got on accident, and it was just this really inappropriate movie, and it kind of just ruined the whole Christmas. It was like a Christmas Eve, and it kind of ruined the whole night. And, you know, it does matter. You know, you sit down, you watch a really wholesome, beautiful video together. It builds a strong memory or bond with you know, your parents or the kids.
Yeah, for sure. One point of clarification: when we talk about Angel Studios, you'll actually hear me talk about they or them. And yes, I am an original co-founder, all the way back to the days when it started as VidAngel and then it later became Angel Studios. But I am now an independent creator who's making movies and TV series that I then take to Angel Studios for distribution. And so even though I'm one of the original co-founders, I'll talk about Angel Studios as they, them. And so when we look at, you know, the innovations and stuff that have come out of Angel Studios, I'll be careful not to take credit for them, because they have an amazing team over there who have done that.
Well, and how'd you decide? I mean, you've had your hand in this from the beginning. That's why I talk about it as such. But so maybe give us a little bit of your background of kind of how you evolved into that role from where you were before.
Yeah. So the original co-founders were the Harmon Brothers, Neil, Jeff, Jordan, and Daniel, and myself. I'm a cousin. So I go way back with these guys. We grew up together. In fact, Jeff and I are the same age. And so, you know, we were best buddies growing up, and we were always into, you know, some sort of mischief together. But we ended up as college roommates. And while we were college roommates, we had another roommate named Devin Graham. Everyone knows him now as Devin Supertramp, right? Well, Devin was into videography, and at the time he was, you know, just taking wedding photos and doing wedding videos and stuff. In fact, he shot my engagement photos with me and my wife. But it was funny because he offered us a wedding video, and at the time, wedding videos weren't really a thing, and he showed us one, and my wife, well, at the time, my fiance, we both looked at it and we were like, oh, that seems kind of cheesy. Thanks, Devin, but no thanks. So we took a pass on it, and then he became, you know, world famous just a few years later. And we're like, oh man, we probably should have said yes. But anyways, after, you know, we all roomed together, I got married and left, went off, started my career. And Jeff and Devin, and it ended up being a couple of other guys, they started playing around with YouTube, right? And at the time, it had barely been purchased by Google. It was like this new thing, you know, mostly just viral cat videos or whatever. And they came up with this harebrained idea of like, well, what if you tried to grow a business on YouTube? And so they launched this YouTube video for a little company called Orabrush, which was a tongue scraper that gets rid of bad breath, and went crazy viral. It was huge, and they ended up becoming the first company to buy ads in mass on YouTube, which was super exciting for Google because they had this vision of turning it into an ad platform, right? But at the time, nobody understood that or got it. Well, Jeff and Devin and these guys got it with Orabrush. So at this point, I'm now married. I've gone off to Washington, D.C. I've started my career. I'm working as a statistician, later as an intelligence analyst, and I'm watching all of this from afar. And as I'm seeing what these guys are doing, I'm realizing like this is way bigger than bad breath. This is way bigger than, you know, tongue scrapers. They're onto something. This is the tip of an iceberg that's something huge. And so as I was staying in touch with Jeff, he called me one day and we were talking about Poopery, this funny poop spray. A little company in Texas who had reached out to Jeff and they're like, hey, we love what you did with Orabrush. Can you come do that for Poopery? And I remember he was kind of like, it's a funny product, but it actually works. Like it really works. And he's like, they're trying to recruit me, but I just don't know if I'm interested or not. And I had one of those moments where like, I don't really know how to describe it other than like almost a conduit of communication, straight from heaven.
Yeah, we call those downloads, right?
Yeah. Like I had one of those instant downloads where I felt like God was just saying to me, like, here's your opportunity, take it. And I told Jeff right then and there, like zero hesitation. I was like, I will come do this with you. Like, we need to do this. And I remember his reaction was one of surprise because, like, I had a good, stable job. I lived in Virginia. We had bought a house and had the white picket fence. And, we were kind of starting the dream, so to speak. And without a moment's hesitation, I was just like, yeah, we'll leave all that. I'll move my family back to Utah. Let's do this. And so Jeff was like, okay, let's do this. So he went and rounded up Neil and Daniel, Jordan. They left Orabrush. I left. Deloitte was where I was working at the time, moved across the country. And so we started the Poopery campaign. And of course, it's all history now, but it was wildly successful. It sold, gosh, I don't remember the exact number, but in the first 4 or 5 months, it sold something like $18 million worth of Poopery. And prior to that, I think they had done, in their whole history, they had done a few tens of thousands online.
Wow.
They had a more healthy retail presence, but online they had almost nothing. And all of a sudden we're selling millions of dollars of this stuff. Well, we had a 6-month contract with Poopery, and the original thinking was, hey, if this works, then we'll just merge into Poopery and we'll kind of become the marketing arm. But it was pretty clear pretty quick that wasn't a long-term fit. And so we started realizing like, okay, well, at the end of this 6 months, we're going to have to figure something else out. And I had just come from Deloitte, so I kind of understood the world of a services business, this agency type structure. And so, my vote was, hey, let's go build an agency. And at the time, the brothers didn't love the idea of building an agency, but Neil, basically in his spare time, had coded this little app where you could go watch YouTube videos and turn off cuss words. You could choose which cuss words you wanted to turn off. And he had originally kind of built this thing like, hey, is this something I could do for my kids? Because he was trying to unlock this world of like, there's so much amazing stuff happening on YouTube. How can I make it more accessible to my kids? And so when he did that kind of opened up the possibility of like, wait, we could actually build a business around this. And that's when VidAngel was born. And so, gosh, for the next, I don't remember the exact timeline, but there was a good 9 or so months where we just all dove in and just went full steam on VidAngel. Neil coded it. Jordan was huge in kind of like building out the structure of it and stuff. Jeff and Daniel and myself, we were more focused on marketing it. So some people still remember the original marketing videos. We took this family and shot them with, I don't remember how many thousands of paintballs to represent, each paintball represents a cuss word. Right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so anyways, we did some stuff like that. Some of it went viral, it was pretty exciting. But ultimately, after, 8-9 months of that, we realized the product we had built was actually pretty crappy. Like, I couldn't even get my wife to use it because it was so buggy and so problematic.
Yeah, I remember watching in those early days, I was trying to watch Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, if you remember that. And the movie's kind of confusing. And so it would cut out total parts. And I was so lost, I had to turn it off. I couldn't even follow the movie anymore.
Kind of ruined it.
Yeah. So I remember that early on.
Yeah, so that was, when we realized that, like we realized we actually had to go back to the drawing board and rebuild it, start from scratch, take everything we had learned. And so Neil and Jordan went heads down on rebuilding VidAngel. And so during that time, that left Jeff, Daniel, and myself to be like, okay, well, what do we do? Like, still got to put food on the table. And so we went out and started, pounding the pavement to drum up some work. We're like, I guess let's go, give someone some marketing help. Well, out of that effort came Squatty Potty.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Squatty Potty and the Pooping Unicorn.
Yep.
It went wild.
I had the founder of that on my podcast a couple years ago.
Oh, which one? Was it Bobby?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Bobby.
Down in St. George.
By the way, Bobby was like, to launch that Pooping Unicorn, all of Squatty Potty's investors and board were like, no way, no how. Like, this is brand suicide.
Yeah.
And Bobby was the one who, like, he caught the vision, he saw it, and he green-lighted us. And so to this day, I like give Bobby his props because he had the courage to.
Well, I give you guys all so much credit. I mean, you guys had so much foresight of where this was all going. It's easy to remember now, right? To think about it now and be like, oh yeah, of course, this is what people were going to want. But it was so not obvious during those times. Nobody knew how to use these tools like YouTube and social media. And, I had the founder of Blend Tech on, and that was one of the few guys that caught it as well. And I just think now, I'm like, God, you guys were so brilliant because it was really hard to understand. Even today, a lot of people don't have any clue how to use these amazing tools that are in front of us. But, to have that foresight clear back then, it's just very admirable.
Yeah, thank you. And looking back, I don't feel like I had all the foresight other than just kind of knowing there's something here.
Right.
And we need to dig in and figure out what that something is.
Yeah.
So, of course, out of the Squatty Potty success spun several others. So right on the heels of Squatty Potty, Purple Mattresses happened. Blew up, huge success. Then Chatbook blew up, huge success. And so by the time Neil and Jordan had finished rebuilding, the next version of VidAngel, and it was time to go back and work on VidAngel, things had like taken off for us. And so what we ended up deciding to do, so Jeff shifted his focus back over to VidAngel. So as Neil, Jeff, and Jordan were focused on VidAngel, Daniel and I decided to stay full-time focused on just building the agency, which became known as Harmon Brothers.
Yep.
So Daniel was the chief creative officer. I was the CEO. We built an agency that, gosh, we had in the 9 years that I ran it, if I remember correctly, we had 5 of our clients became billion-dollar brands, and another 6 of them became $100 million brands. And so, gosh, that's like 11 super successes in the course of 9 years. And then in addition to that, there was like a bunch of, smaller base hit, like Squatty Potty.
Squatty Potty, I was going to say, because I think, they sold for tens of millions, but it wasn't like $1 billion company or anything. But I remember talking to somebody a couple of years back, and he said to me, you got to watch, and we were talking about marketing. He said, you got to watch the Harmon Brothers, like their agency. He said, they are the best in the world at what they do. They're the best. And I was like, interesting. And so I've always kind of had this little side interest in what, your guys' company was doing, because somebody that I respected a lot told me that you guys were literally the best at doing it. And so, it goes to say for what you guys were pulling off.
Well, thank you. I really feel like we had a special group of people. We built a special team, and gosh, that team just pulled off amazing things. But if I was to identify one thing of like pulling back the curtain and saying like, hey, here's what we were doing that made it special. So like very early, almost at the beginning, Daniel Harmon read a book by the CEO of Pixar. It's called Creativity Inc. And man, it became like almost our company Bible. Like we required everybody to read it. And we studied that book inside and out. And in it, Ed Catmull, he basically, peeled back the curtain of Pixar and showed this is how Pixar has done what it's done. And we went and like, we were maniacal about trying to reverse engineer Pixar's process and apply it to advertising. And like, if I had to sum up what that means, it's basically like, if you think about startup world, you know how there's kind of this like lean startup method where it's like, come up with the minimal viable product, the MVP, right? Come up with it as fast and cheap as possible, and then test. See what you learn, and then iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate, test, iterate. Well, that's essentially what Pixar does with storytelling. They're like, oh, here's an idea. Okay, how do we test it? All right, let's take those learnings. Now let's iterate, test, learn, iterate, test, learn, iterate. And they do that over and over again. And that was the process that we applied to advertising. And at the time, it just seemed like the best way to do things. And we were industry outsiders, so we didn't know that there was any other way. But it turns out most of the industry doesn't do that. They don't think that way. Most of the industry will be like, okay, let's go write a script. All right, we'll iterate a couple times on the script. Okay, script is locked. Done. And now everything moving forward is beholden to that script that can't change anymore because it's locked. And they have this process. Well, it turns out Hollywood does a lot of that too, where like Hollywood structures are built such that if you go hire a writer from the Writers Guild, which is this union of writers, right? You're allowed X number of revisions on that script. And once you get through those X number of revisions, if you want any more, you have to go re-up and rehire these writers. Otherwise, your script is locked and it can't change. And what that means is like, if you're on set and somebody has a brilliant idea to just improv something and try something new, you don't necessarily have the flexibility to even do that. Whereas Pixar's methodology of constant iteration and the methodology that we used at Harmon Brothers, we were constantly tweaking, tweak. And sometimes people hated us for it because we'd be like 2 days from launch and somebody would realize like, I've got this idea on how to make this better. And everyone would be like, oh man, that is a good idea, but that is so much work. And now we have to like go back and, you know, make major changes or refilm something. And that's just the nature of doing it that way.
Well, there's a real intelligence in having great ideas, but not being attached to the idea, you know, more so obsessing over what you're trying to get as an outcome. And it's one of the things that I've always tried to do on my businesses. My, you know, clients and customers always say the same thing. They say, dude, I've never met somebody that can pivot so fast off of one of his own ideas. You don't have this ego attached to it. I don't have this need for my idea to be the right one. I'm just trying to get it all right. And so when you can do that, and you, as a company, when you're willing to go, gosh, it'd be a lot easier to just put this out as it is, but to be able to pivot, knowing that there's a little bit better way to do it, you know, it takes a lot of humility in those moments to do that.
I feel like entrepreneurs learn that pretty quickly. It's almost like forced into entrepreneurs, right?
Just always doing that.
But artists, that is a skill set that, I'm going to be honest, like most artists haven't learned that skill set. And having, you know, now trained dozens, you know, of artists on that skill set, it's hard to learn, and it requires an enormous amount of humility, because typically when you bring an artist onto a project, and I use the term artist loosely, right? It can be a writer, it can be an editor.
Anybody creating things.
Yeah. But when they come onto a project, they feel this need and this desire to kind of put their fingerprint on it, right? They want to have an impact on it. And so, you know, they fall in love with their ideas a little bit, and it's really hard to be told like, well, actually this idea sucks, or that idea was a pretty good one, but here's a better one. And initially when artists go through that process, it shakes their confidence. They feel like, oh my gosh, like, am I failing? Am I getting kicked out of that? But you have to help them realize that like, no, like even though we didn't land on your ideas still helped us go through the process to get to where we eventually landed. And that part of the process is essential. And it's also like when you get 90% of the way there and then you have to make a big pivot, you'll hear a lot of people be like, well, that would have been really nice to know, you know, last week or last month or whatever. And you're like, yeah, I hear you. I empathize with you, but we didn't know.
Yeah, I also didn't think of it last week.
We had to get to here
Yes.
in order for it to trigger that idea and that learning, that realization. Now we know. Now we can pivot, go make the changes, make it amazing. But it's just part of the process. It's work.
Yeah.
It's really hard work.
Amazing. So how'd you decide to go from that to where you're at today with, making these movies that are, you're getting ready on?
So having studied Pixar, we discovered that they actually started in advertising too. So everybody knows Pixar, 1995, that's when Toy Story came out and they shook the world with, this 3D computer animation that had never been seen before. Well, not a lot of people know that there were several years prior to that where they were developing this technology and using it in advertising. So you can go back and if you go on YouTube and look up Pixar ads, you'll see this portfolio of ads. One that I remember was like jelly lifesavers. I don't know if you might remember from when you were a kid, like they had these animated lifesavers that because they're jelly, well,
it would make sense that they would start as an advertising agency because you only have to make 30-second clips or 60-second clips. They could do that and have a budget and the size of company that it was at that time. Right.
And it turns out there's actually a lot of great storytellers who started in ads. So Michael Bay, I believe Ron Howard.
Wow.
Shoot, I'm having a brain fart, but the super famous Apple commercial from 1984.
Oh, yeah.
What was his name?
He throws the sledgehammer through the TV.
Yeah. I'm having a total brain fart, but he went on to have great storytelling career. And even Disney did some, Walt Disney way back in the day, even he did some ad work. And so we realized that, this skill set and this team that we had built were actually really set up to shift focus and go into long format storytelling. Like, we came into advertising at a time when you couldn't just force feed whatever crap you wanted to your audience. Like, but think back to the TV days where you have this 30-second spot.
Yeah, you had to watch whatever was on.
Your audience is captive, right?
Yeah.
And so as advertisers, like, you didn't actually have to do that good of a job entertaining. It just
had to make sure the brand stuck with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you fast forward to internet days where you've got the YouTube skip button. Then you get into news feeds like Facebook and later Instagram and so on and so forth. And if something's not entertaining, you just scroll right by, right? And so to be successful, we had to make our ads incredibly entertaining. And so we had developed this ability to not only sell, convince somebody to take action, but we did it in a very entertaining way. And I remember our customers would often ask us, like, how long of an ad is too long? And we had ads that ranged from 15 seconds and 30 seconds all the way up to 10, 12 minutes. And I would say kind of our average was like in that 2 to 3 minute space, which in the world of advertising, that's an eternity, right? If you think about like when you're watching a basketball game or whatever and a 60-second ad comes on for some pharmaceutical, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so long.
Yeah, I think it's even on Hulu. It'll say like 120 seconds until your next one. You're like, oh, do I even want to keep watching this show? And it's only 2 minutes, But if you're watching it to watch an ad, you'll watch it for 10, 12 minutes.
That was what we realized is that if you make it entertaining, so we would always tell our customers, like, we make it as long as it needs to be, but not a second longer. And so if you make it so entertaining and you have great rhythm and great pace, people will totally forget about the time. They'll watch a 4-minute ad, not even realize that 4 minutes went by because they're engaged. They're enjoying it. And we actually developed a process to test ourselves to see how we were doing. And originally we called it a laugh graph. I've since come to think of it more as like an attention graph. What we would do is we would take a script and we'd go read it to people. And we would film how they were reacting during it. And then we would take that recording back and we would have an intern sit down and they would watch that person's face and we would be looking for clues of I'm engaged or clues of I'm distracted. And as soon as somebody would get distracted, they're checking their watch, they're glancing away. We would note exactly where that happened. And then we would go back in and we'd say, what's wrong with the script right here? We got to fix it. We got to tighten it up. We need something more entertaining. We need a joke. We need to cut it out. It needs to move faster. Whatever it is, we've got to fix it. Wow. And we would do that at the script phase. Then later we would do it on rough cut edits. You'd put your initial edit together and then you'd go out and test it. And what we realized is we had built this ability to actually see how well we're entertaining people. And if we're failing at any point in the process, we can stop and fix it. And so that was this realization of like, we could actually apply this to long format storytelling, to movies, to TV series. And in doing so, we can get to tell stories that have bigger impacts on society, that, we can, impact society in positive ways and tell stories that move people, inspire people, so on and so forth. So Daniel and I decided that we were going to take the agency and we were going to pivot away from being an agency and we were going to become a studio.
Wow.
And so our first attempt at that was the TV series Tuttle Twins.
Did you work with Connor on that?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, he's been on the show. He's a good friend of mine.
So Connor Boyack and Elijah Stanfield, they authored the books, which I think last I heard they've sold well over 4 million copies. They might be pushing 5 million or so.
Yeah.
Phenomenally successful.
And important.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they're focused on teaching principles that don't get taught in schools. Yep. So things like
American principles, conservative principles.
Yep. Liberty,
family,
entrepreneurship, family, all those types of things. Well, they had hired us to help them with their marketing, right? And so we really learned Tuttle Twins inside and out and how to sell it because we were helping with their marketing. We were helping sell, thousands.
On the book side.
Yeah, on the books. Well, meanwhile, we're using them at home. We have all the books. We're reading them to our kids. And so we really get immersed in this. Well, when the books kind of blow up, that opens up this door of okay, this could be adapted into a TV series, but it doesn't really align with industry safe politics, so to speak.
You're going to get blackballed basically if you come up with this material.
Yeah. So even though they have the numbers behind their book sales that would totally justify it, a Netflix or an Amazon probably not interested.
Well, I saw something the other day. It was the most popular or most well-known human to ever exist was Jesus, but nobody will touch him. And it shows that even Hollywood, they won't touch something like Jesus if they would rather not do it than get the money for doing it. And so a lot of those gatekeepers that you talked about at the beginning, the one thing they care about more than money is not sharing these types of values.
Yeah, it seems crazy, right? But that's a perfect example of Dallas Jenkins, creator of The Chosen, had his, he had some failures inside of the system, right? The gatekeeper system that found him at kind of rock bottom at his career at a point where he was willing to go try something outside the system, outside the norm. And, in collaboration with Angel, they built The Chosen, which is this amazing success. And it was so successful that now even mainstream Hollywood, has to accept it. Right.
Right.
And, now it's on Amazon,
right.
So, going back to Tuttle Twins, I think it was Jeff Harmon who first came to me and he was he knew we were wanting to do a TV series. And he was the one who came to me and he was you really ought to start with Tuttle Twins. And initially I was kind of oh man, is he right? Do we really want to start with something that, has a little bit of polarizing, nature to it?
Kind of are we doing this moment?
Yeah. I started thinking is this going to pigeonhole us? If we start with Tuttle Twins, then is that just going to pigeonhole us to oh, now we only do, political type material. But as I thought about it, I was this is actually the perfect project to start on for a number of reasons. First off, we're really good at educating plus entertaining, right? So when you're teaching about squatty potty, right, you're like covering this super gross topic and educating people on the colon, but doing it in a fun, safe way, right? And if we can do that with poopery and squatty potty and like deodorant and, you know, these kind of like more icky subjects, like we could totally take on a political subject and make it safe, make it entertaining, make it fun, make it safe, make it non-controversial. Like prior to squatty potty, like having any sort of like poop talk in a group setting, like, you know, you just don't go there. But then if you can make it safe and fun, then like, okay, now people can go there. So that was reason number one. And then reason number two was we all loved Tuttle Twins. And to be able to take something that you're already passionate about, you already love it.
It's a huge difference.
Oh, yeah. When you have something that you can just throw your passion behind. So I remember going to Daniel, and he took some convincing too. I remember trying to convince him that, hey, Tuttle Twins is the one. And you know, he had to kind of stew on it for a while, but eventually he came around and saw the possibility there. And so we went to Connor and we're like, hey, Connor, we're going to be making a TV series. Why don't we do Tuttle Twins? And you know, he caught the vision eventually too. And so we set out on it and we went and made Tuttle Twins. We crowdfunded it similar to The Chosen, where we went out to the crowd and said, hey, we want to make this. We need your help. Please invest.
And you have customer information of millions of people too. That helps.
Yeah. Yep. So, so that was round one of our attempt to leave the agency world to become
and that
studio.
was a gutsy move because, I mean, you're having a lot of success as a marketing agency to just make that pivot. I mean, you use the same formula, so it's not a matter of whether I think you felt it would work or not. It's just you had to leave something that was already working really well in order to do this new thing.
Well, that's actually where the story gets interesting because, yes, we had to take a sizable chunk of our team and move them off of ads.
Right.
And of course, ads pay the bills.
Right.
And put them over onto Tuttle Twins, where Tuttle Twins does not pay the bills. You know, in fact, it costs us money. And we hope that someday in the future it becomes this, you know, profitable thing. But for now, it's all speculative. It's a hope, right? And so that was the first year in our history that we didn't grow. We had a flat year from a revenue perspective. But because we took all these people off of ads and put them on Tuttle Twins, profits were lower that year. Bonuses were lower that year. And so even though when we set out to pivot, everybody was nodding their heads.
Yeah,
and
everyone's
saying,
on board, but it's still kind of like...
Everybody was excited. But then when brass tacks hit, and it was like, oh, there's actually going to be some sacrifice in making this pivot.
Yeah.
We kind of had a come to Jesus moment as a company, where it was like, okay, is this really what we want? Or do we want to stay an agency and, you know, stay who we are? And you know, the overall voice was that they wanted to stay an agency. And I felt like I had done 9 years of building an agency and I was ready to move my focus over to longer format storytelling. And so I said, okay, no problem. You guys be an agency, but I'm going to step down and I'm going to go independently build a studio. Daniel also stepped down from his role and he went full time on Tuttle Twins. And so we put successors in place to step in behind us so that they could continue to thrive and be successful. And Daniel, to this day, is now just focused on building Tuttle Twins. They finished season 3. They're starting season 4 now. It's going phenomenally well. It's consistently, you know, one of the top 3 or 4 shows on the Angel platform. So it's really hit its stride and it's doing great. And I went and spun up my studio. It's called 10 Ton. And our first project was Homestead, which that launched in theaters this past Christmas.
Yeah.
It was as our first project, we had a relatively small budget. It was a $6 million film, and it did $21 million in theaters, which that's not a blockbuster, but for an independent,
it's a profitable
like that,
movie though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it surprised a lot of people at how well it did. And then since then, it launched inside of Angel Studios ecosystem, and it has consistently been one of the top 1 or 2 shows on their whole platform. Then it went for rent on.
I was gonna say, I think I bought it on Amazon.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon.
I bought it, and
you can get it on Apple
a couple of months ago.
So we stayed in Amazon's top 10 for 2.5 months.
Amazing.
Which you look on either side of Homestead, and there was always $200 million film, $300 million film, and then Homestead, and we were,
Well, what was cool about it is it doesn't feel like a small budget movie. You got good actors, and you can tell it's got a good screenwriter, and you didn't go cheap on the setting and any of that kind of stuff. I think there was a frustration around Utah forever that, just things felt and looked a little bit less quality than Hollywood. And I think that's probably why you stayed in Amazon's top 10 for so long, is because it doesn't have that feel to it. I mean, you watch it and you just feel like you're watching a normal movie.
Yeah, man, I have to give a ton of credit to several people, but Jason Ross, he was a co-author of the book series Black Autumn. That's what Homestead is based on.
Yeah.
We ended up pivoting away from the Black Autumn name because he kind of wrote it more as a military thriller. So it's kind of more aimed at young, 20 to 30 something males. They don't mind a lot of swearing, a lot of violence, that type of thing. And then all of a sudden we're bringing it into the Angel Studios ecosystem. And we're like, we have to come up with a family safe, we need to appeal more to women, which the themes of the original books were all about this idea of when the crap hits the fan,
right?
It's actually faith and family and community that rise from the ashes. And that's a theme that totally works inside the Angel ecosystem, but we had to come at it kind of a different way. And so in working through that, we decided to rebrand so that everyone would kind of understand, yes, they're related, but Homestead is a different approach than Black Autumn. But anyways, Jason, he not only was he a co-author on the book series, but he was one of the writers, the main writer. He was the lead writer on the screenplay, and he actually provided his whole home and his whole homestead for filming, which gave us this world-class location where on our budget, we never could have afforded something like that. But because he opened that up to us, now all of a sudden we have this setting where okay, we can make this look big budget, right?
Awesome. And
then huge credit to, Ben Cassica and Ben Smallbone. They did so much with so little and just made it awesome. But anyways, yeah. Thank you for saying that.
Well, no, for a first project too, man, geez, that's, it's very impressive. And so that allowed you, I'm guessing, to get a lot more bigger budget type things coming in afterwards, because I think that's where you've kind of gone with it from there, right?
Yeah. So our project that we have coming down the pipeline, and I guess depending on when this goes live, July 1st, 2025, we're announcing Young Washington, which is a movie about basically the coming of age story of George Washington.
Which, by the way, sorry, but has never been told. I'm a history buff. I'm an American. I flew an American flag above my ceiling as a child, and I don't know that story that well.
Nobody does. It's really not a well-known story.
No.
But people don't realize that when George Washington was young, 22 years old, he went out and made some of the biggest mistakes that you can make that should have just demolished his career. He accidentally started a global war. Is that the French and Indian War?
Yeah. Okay. Because I mean, that's all I know about him, but
yeah. And I won't get into spoilers here, but essentially he makes as bad of mistakes as you can possibly make, torpedoes his career. But then by going through the worst of the worst mistakes, that forges his character to where he has this comeback moment where now they're in the French and Indian War, and he's serving as General Braddock's aide, and they end up in this battle where the British are just getting thumped on. General Braddock dies. The troops are getting demolished, and he has to round up everybody and perform a safe evacuation. And in order to do so, he has to jump on a horse and charge the enemy lines. Mm-hmm. And he gets 2 horses shot out from underneath him. He gets bullet holes in his coat, a bullet hole in his hat, but he goes unscathed. And in doing so, he rounds up everybody, gets it organized, leads a safe retreat, saves hundreds of lives, and becomes George Washington, right? Mm. This was the moment when all of a sudden he earned the respect of everybody and became this legend. And later, toward the end of his life, he ends up meeting an Indian chief. And this Indian chief tells him, I was on the other side and we were shooting at you. We were all aimed at you and we could not hit you. And basically says, like, you were protected by some sort of...
I've heard that story, Was there a book that came out a couple of years ago that told like 5 stories that saved the America or something like that? And I swear that story's in there.
It very well could be.
Yeah. It's the only time, because most people don't know that story. I mean, I know it because I read a lot of history, but most people have never heard that. It's just a... So does the movie cover all this?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so man, I'm so excited about this for a whole bunch of reasons. 1, because the story is just awesome. And 2, we have John Irwin to direct this, which a lot of your listeners are already familiar with John Irwin. He did House of David most recently, which is one of the top shows in all streaming right now. It's on Amazon Prime. He did I Can Only Imagine, Jesus Revolution, American Underdog, which is the Kurt Warner
show, yeah.
And not a ton of people realize it, but John Irwin is the only director in the whole entire industry who has ever achieved an A+ cinema score 4 different times. So for context, cinema score started, I think it was about 40 years ago. It was like early 80s, maybe late 70s, sometime in there. Since then, every show that goes through the theaters receives a cinema score, and it's an A+ down to an F. And in the whole history, 40-something year history of cinema score, I think we're up to like 108 movies have achieved an A+ cinema score. So it's rare.
Yeah.
John has done it 4 times.
Wow.
He's the only one. Mm. So not only is John like the perfect director for this, but he's an American history buff. Like, he loves this stuff. George Washington is his personal hero. And so he sees this project as... it's
amazing.
It's his life's work.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, okay, we've got Angel Studios, who is giving us worldwide distribution. We've got John Irwin, the perfect director for this thing. We have this amazing story. And I'm like, now we just have to go out and execute and take this thing to the world. And we have the opportunity, in my opinion, to have such a positive impact.
Well, the country needs, I mean, if you want to destroy a nation, you destroy their history. You weaken their leaders from the past, not even from the future or from the present. You destroy the heroes that people look up to. And so more than ever, we need to tell the stories of our founding fathers and of the amazing people that came and built this country, along the way. And what's cool about this is it opens it up for you. I mean, it's endless how many stories you could tell, right? I mean, George Washington, obviously, that story goes first. I mean, he was the first, he's the OG. But at the end of the day, so one of my heroes is Paul Revere. And I just love him because he used kind of becoming, it's kind of like me having a podcast in a weird sense in 2025. It's like he was the most networked dude in the whole land. And that's why when he went and he told people stuff, they listened. He knew how to get everyone together. And that's kind of what I am. I'm kind of a community builder above everything. And I've just always loved how fearless he was and everything else. But these stories of these guys, and especially kids nowadays, they don't know American history. They don't know these stories. Every July 4th, I get so frustrated. I go to watch a movie and there's nothing. There's no good TV shows. There's no good movies about the founding fathers. I mean, you got Patriot, And besides
Which
that,
was good.
it was amazing. Patriots good, but it's also like the not as good version of Braveheart. You know what I mean?
Sure,
it's like, it's still not even like as good as Braveheart. So you're like, okay, it's good. It is. But it's also kind of more fiction than anything, right? It doesn't actually tell this any history. There's one TV series I like about the Sons of Liberty. They're my favorite. They were just rebels, and that's kind of my spirit, And there's a couple things like that, but unless you really know how to search for it, there's not a whole lot out there. And so,
there's John Adams.
Yeah, John Adams. Yep.
There's some good stuff out there, but nothing has kind of like brought it all together.
Correct.
Under one umbrella.
Yeah.
And like I hope that Young Washington is just the beginning, so that we can tell all those amazing stories, because I agree, like telling these stories, what better way to inspire the future? Mm-hmm. This up and coming generation, like I feel like so much of society only wants to talk about the founding fathers' flaws, right?
Yeah, they want to fly every flag but America. And it's like, hold on a second,
Look, the simple reality is humans aren't perfect. Mm-hmm. None of us are. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that imperfect people can't do amazing things. That doesn't mean that imperfect people can't impact the world in such positive, amazing ways. And that's what the founding fathers did. They were imperfect human beings. They had their flaws. They had their weaknesses. Everybody does. But despite all that, they did amazing things. And I love the term that I believe it was Washington used, the term the divine hand of providence. He felt like there was something guiding all of it, and he called it the divine hand of providence. And I'm really excited in our opportunity to tell this story. We can include the divine hand of providence. We don't have to write God out of the story.
It's actually a really good point. It's a really cool part of it.
Yeah. It's...
Well, and I think, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but there's this whole industry in the South of these Christian-based movies, and they're not even done that well, but they do well they sell well. They get bring a lot of money in. And so like some people might be listening to this and being like, well, it sounds risky. If you're going to include God, you're going to cut out so many people. But I don't believe that. I mean, you saw what happened with, when, The Passion of the Christ came out, or even The Sound of Freedom a couple of years. Some of these movies, like people are afraid to do this, but Americans are starved for it. There's such a giant number of people that want these stories. We want the story the way it was. God did have his hand in it. That is the way that the story was told through the history. And so to be able to bring that to the big theater, man, it's going to be awesome.
I've heard Jeff Harmon say something to the effect of, it's ironic that the group of people who believe in the creator are sometimes terrible creators when it comes to media. And I think you bring up a super valid point that just because we're including God in the story, that doesn't mean it's going to become some cheesy, preachy, call it, cheesy faith film or whatever. Right. No, this is going to be a proper... this is going to be an exciting adventure movie with all the peril, all the drama that you would expect. Great storytelling, great acting, great cinematography. It's all going to be there.
Are you, just curious, are you announcing yet either like what is the budget or any of the actors that are going to be, like who's going to be playing George Washington?
We haven't announced casting just yet. That's, by the time this podcast comes out, we'll probably only be a month or so away from announcing casting. So, cool. So stay tuned for that. But one thing that we are doing, and as far as I know, this has never been done before, we're actually opening up ticket sales a full year in advance. So July 4th, 2025, we're opening up ticket sales for July 4th, 2026. Now, why are we doing that? It comes down to this. When you have a story that's this important, we want to open it up so that our viewers can actually help make it a success. And the way that they can help is when you launch in theaters, particularly on July 4th, there's a lot of competition.
Yeah, it's a big weekend.
Yeah, big weekend. So we're going to be up against the biggest of the big blockbusters, probably a bunch of superhero reboots and a Disney America remake 9. Or, whatever. And in order for us to compete, we've got to get as many screens as possible. So for instance, a little independent movie, it might open on 1,000 screens nationwide. Whereas a big blockbuster will open on 4,000 screens nationwide. Now, what determines how many screens you get is how much they call them the exhibitors. It's basically the theaters. How much do they believe that this is going to make money? And one way to make them believe is to show them ticket pre-sales in advance.
That's brilliant.
That's a way to signal to the whole industry that there's demand for this and this story needs to be told.
That's your marketing mind coming in, bro.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, you guys, it's just, I love talking to marketers because I believe that's what I think I am too. Almost above everything else is like, you see where the ball's going, you see where the puck's going. You can just see things before other people. Right. And, it seems so obvious, but even when you say that now, it's like, yeah, if I'm going to buy it next year, all right, I'll buy the ticket now, whatever. And then if enough people do that, not only does it, it just signals to the big box offices that, okay, we need to get more screens for these guys. And then from there, all you have to do is put out a good product and it'll.
Yeah. Yeah. If you put out a good product, tell the story well, market it well, then that key is getting on enough screens. Because if we open on 1,000 screens, we're never going to be able to compete. But if we open on 3,000 screens, then all of a sudden we're going toe to toe with all the big boys. And so that's giving everyone who feels passionate about this story being told and about how this can impact society in a positive way. This is giving all those people the opportunity to say, I can actually help. I can make an impact. Mm-hmm. I'm going to see the movie anyways.
Well, I'll buy a bunch. I mean, look, dude, like I love telling the stories of these people. They were heroes. And like you said, they were so imperfect, but man, they had such balls, such courage. Like I feel like kind of in my life, I know that God works through me and I'm a total idiot half the time. Like I know how flawed I am, but I know God works through me. And so I can look at their imperfections and go, those men deserve to be honored for what they did and what they built. And, America, the experiment of America was the greatest experiment and it works. Now we have all the things that can corrupt a society and everything get played into it over a couple hundred years. But at the end of the day, what they built and what they set up, we're benefiting it from today, hundreds of years later, And
what better way to inspire our kids?
100%.
Right? Because think about it. If your kids are hearing this message of like, oh, if you're not perfect, then like sit down
right?
and shut up. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're hearing this message of like, no, these guys aren't perfect, but look what they did. Mm-hmm. What better way to make, my 14-year-old son look up and say, what can I do? How can I make an impact? And coming out of Young Washington, I want everybody to walk away with this feeling of optimism for our future. It wasn't just a bright future once upon a time. In fact, the icon, the rising sun, this is the Young Washington icon. Mm. This was inspired by George Washington's chair that he sat in much later at the Constitutional Convention. There was a sun engraved on the back of his chair. And after they ratified the Constitution, Benjamin Franklin made the famous comment where he said, I've been wondering if that's a rising sun or a setting sun. And I believe it's a rising sun on this, on this nation. Well, we still believe it's rising. Mm-hmm. And so that we've made the icon for Young Washington this rising sun because it's this message of optimism, of hope. And we want our kids and grandkids, and we want the next generation to feel that hope and that optimism. So that's what that's what this is all about.
So this podcast is going to come out about when you're releasing these ticket sales. How do people buy or support?
So let's get a URL set up for your listeners. So it'll be angel.com/
Just put Jimmy Rex Show.
Okay, let's do angel.com/ Jimmy Rex Show. I'll go talk to Angel and make sure that happens. So angel.com, Jimmy Rex Show. You go there, you buy your tickets. And by the way, as a thank you to anyone who stands up and buys their tickets now, every ticket that you buy enters you into a chance to win a vintage custom F-250 that we're giving away. It's just our way of saying thank you to anyone who stands up and says, yeah, let's help support this early.
Cool. And can we buy specific theaters, or how does it work? You just buy a ticket and then you can redeem it at theaters?
Yeah. So what happens is you buy your tickets now, and then later, once the show gets listed in theaters, then you can actually go and redeem it, and you can choose your seat and your show time and all that stuff. But for now, you're just buying the ticket that reserves that ability for you in the future. And in doing so, once again, this is huge. It is what signals to the whole industry that there's demand for this story. And it's what is going to allow us to compete with the big boys. And if we can succeed competing with the big boys, that's what's going to unlock the ability to not just tell the story of young Washington, but that's when we get to dive in, go deeper on all the founding fathers.
I love it, man.
And really make these stories known.
I love that. Well, appreciate you, man. Appreciate what you're doing. It's needed. It's fun. And can't wait to see where it goes. I can't wait to watch the videos you make about the films you make about Paul Revere and Sam Adams and the rest of them. So,
oh man, that'll be so exciting.
Well, I appreciate you, man. And thanks again. This has been fun.
My pleasure. Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you again for listening to the Jimmy Rex Show. And if you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. It really helps me to get better guests, to be able to get the type of people on this podcast. It's going to make it the most interesting. Also, want to tell everybody about my podcast studio, The Rookery Studios, now available in Salt Lake City and Orem, Utah. If you live in Utah and want to produce your own podcast, we take all of the guesswork out of it for you. We make it so simple. All you do is you come in, you sit down, you talk, and leave. We record it, edit it, even post it for you. If interested in doing your own podcast, visit our Instagram and send us a DM, Rookery Studios, or go to our website, therookerystudios.com.